Hey, heard you're getting by. I wanted to talk earlier, but I didn't really have anything good to say. I still don't, but I wanted to make it known that I still care. It's understandable if you don't want to. You've told me about as much as there is. Call me back if you'd like, but you know I probably won't pick up. Anyways, you know how to find me.
Hi, I'm Steve, and I'm a heroin addict.
It definitely felt different here. There was a feeling of something real in what he said. Every weekday, I drove across town to attend group sessions. I was one of the few people not inpatient. Most others lived upstairs and came down for the morning meeting, but left before the extended session for outpatients. The group skewed younger and with a higher percentage of women when compared to the average recovery meeting. There were even people as young as me, still in school. It arose a mood of high school with the same inadequate, out-of-place feelings to match. We started with a check-in. Name, sobriety date, meetings you attended, 2 words describing how you felt, and 2 things you were grateful for. The emotion wheel was passed around the circle as people made their introductions.
I'm Matthew. Sobriety day is December 15th. Meeting yesterday at 8 o'clock. I feel confused and exhausted, and I'm grateful for my friends and the birds.
I was not that succinct on my first day. Then I had no answers besides my name. To find a sobriety date, I had to sit and pause, eventually choosing the current day because I couldn't remember when I had last used. And when asked how I felt, I rambled about how I was new to this. Eventually, I did devise a process to form my responses. Feelings were mostly synonyms of tired and hopeless. Friends were a constant gratitude along with whatever I saw on my drive over, hence the birds. But sometimes the counselor, Veronica, would ask why you were grateful for something, so I started giving answers requiring no explanation. After the first day, I began to prepare and rehearse my introduction on my daily drive to minimize both words spoken and potential words spoken. Typically, each day had some kind of worksheet associated with it, centered around a specific topic like anger, resentment, forgiveness, or the physical side of addiction. But I did enjoy these sessions with the entire group more than the smaller PHP group. At the beginning, I was the only one in PHP, so it was only me and Veronica. And because of this, it felt like I was in therapy again. While sometimes there would be a specific topic, most of the time it was free conversation. She would ask questions like, "What do you want to do?" Or, "What do you want to get out of treatment?" Or, "Why did you enter treatment?" And I couldn't answer. Realizing I couldn't answer to anything I wanted, liked, or envisioned for myself caused me to lock up. This kind of dissociation I hadn't felt in some time. It was the same as the last time I was in counseling, where my mind stops once it realizes I'm hopelessly defective. That kind of silence was the scariest state to be in. I couldn't act, think, or speak. All I could do was sit and experience my vision narrow and distort, and attempt to focus on the flowing carpet instead of how I was completely overwhelmed. And this happened every day. I would go from enjoying listening to others in group sessions as an observer to feeling like I was stuck in a shattered mind as soon as I had to sit down with myself. I was entirely convinced I was in an unworkable state, and I communicated this to Veronica. The thought was maybe I'll be more receptive once I start medication, But at this moment, I have no desire to feel better and no desire to even have that desire. The endless nature of this wore me down. I hadn't heard anything from God. I rarely felt a meaningful connection to anyone, and I was disillusioned with the psychoeducation aspect of recovery not speaking to me at all. There were some instances of relating to others, but it was fleeting. A woman had shared that she had sex with someone at a music festival while on MDMA and had been obsessively searching for him ever since. They had a special connection, which she knew was delusional, but she couldn't stop feeling this way, and she couldn't stop sabotaging any relationship that came after. It was pertinent because coming into rehab, I had the opposite mindset of most others there. I thought my problem was due to my mental health and the way I failed to manage it instead of having a drug dependency. I knew exactly why I was here, but I refused to talk about it. There was some solace in seeing similar behavior in another person, and her being so open about it. The counselors had been urging me to attend an AA meeting now that it was past my first week. So at the very end of the week, late at night on Christmas Eve, I went to my first. Being a holiday, there were only 3 others there. I got some phone numbers after I said it was my first ever meeting, but after it had ended, when the others asked if I wanted to go to another meeting close by, I said no and went home. I never followed up with anyone, but at least I was past showing up for the first time. The reason I went that night, besides delaying to the very end of the week, was due to a sermon I heard on the way home from PHP. It was another day of stress dissociation, and I was driving home on Lakeshore Drive, 1,000 yards staring past the cars in front of me, and I decided to give the radio preachers a try. When I was working at the factory, or delivering pizzas, I often listened to radio sermons, but it had been a while. There was nothing in particular he said, but it gave me enough motivation to attend my first meeting. Eventually I started on bupropion, and it immediately changed how I felt. The moment I realized was as I was walking into a store. I felt great. I felt so good, and I was grinding and clicking my teeth together. There was so much confidence that I was comparing myself to Spider-Man 3 after he gets the black suit, where he self-servingly stops caring about everyone around him. That was when I connected the dots to the medication, which was a stimulant, but it seemed weird to me that I was getting high off 100 milligrams of bupropion. And that high lasted for about a week before I settled into the new baseline. I woke up every morning looking forward to my pill, but the effects concerned me at times. On Wednesday, PHP was virtual, and as I was doing my introduction, I realized how spun out I was. My speech was fast and disorganized, and I started talking about how I started a new medication and how I wasn't sure of the effects yet. But as soon as I stopped talking, the shame hit me from being stimmed out in a recovery group and how obvious it was. And then that shifted into feeling like my heart was in tension from being uncomfortably overstimulated. The benefit of this was having the energy to get things done apart from showing up to group every day. My mood improved to where I didn't get stuck in the pit for prolonged periods, going from feeling awful 70% of the time before medication to 40% afterwards. The important part being I wasn't hopeless a majority of the time anymore, and I was attending multiple outside meetings each week. But it didn't suddenly change how I interacted with people or the beliefs I held about myself. Being one of the few non-inpatient, I felt like an outsider because everyone knew and talked to each other often outside of sessions. So during breaks, I would leave the building and walk the surrounding blocks. And just like before, I'd head out into the cold without a coat.
I feel like I have mind viruses that make any sort of recovery impossible. Meditation can make me feel better and encourage me to actually get things done, but I still have the same thoughts of being fundamentally defective. I'm convinced of certain things that make life ultimately not worth living and me not worthy or able to participate. My thoughts are not conducive to societal function. I'm well aware of that fact. My problem is that I can never conjure up what is wrong from my memories. The moment I'm in front of someone, I can never make the arguments I make in my head. I feel awful when I talk. I feel like I make no sense and I'm wasting people's time. I feel like it doesn't do anything productive to talk. Any progress made is done internally through my isolated stream of thoughts. There isn't a burden to present a cohesive argument. I can pull on past details and arguments within myself, but every time I do the same aloud, I fail. And because I never feel like I'm able to explain myself, I feel isolated because the person is talking to a set of issues and assumptions about me that aren't necessarily true. I think a reason why nothing works, or why I don't value any opinion other than my own when it comes to my mental health, is because my ultimate value is self-hatred. I hate myself more than anything else. Any amount of love, care, affection, disgust, or hate, at the end of the day, doesn't matter because all I care about is how much I despise myself.
Sobriety I saw as something fickle. During one of the morning sessions, I shared how historically emotional upheavals and major life changes usually resulted in me coping with drugs. It seemed to me that I would use again if things got bad enough and I began obsessing. I was never able to handle it before. I needed to turn it off. When attending meetings, I could see the ability for hope and change in others, but I couldn't apply the same to myself. The fact that I felt I was the only person not deserving of affection, forgiveness, or even being liked was not lost on me. Realizing my thinking is delusional was never the problem. The problem is that knowledge has no effect on my feelings, and the sole barrier to feeling better being me, I knew, and had no desire to feel better, to have God's love, to have God's forgiveness. I wanted to be broken more than I already thought I was. It is a waste of God's time to continue pursuing me. On the same day, PHP and an outside AA group had talked about Step 4. The thought that stuck in my mind wasn't a resentment list, it was a personal fault list. When I got home, I pulled out everything I didn't like about myself.
I know I am a dysfunctional person. I have little attachment to the world. I don't think my feelings are true. Any qualitative statement about my feelings feels like I'm exaggerating or trying to fit in with people who do experience emotions. I don't like, but I know I do experience emotions. Conversations are hollow. The process of communicating them force myself to be social. I hate having to find out conversations. Concepts of self-love is repulsive. I hate being the center of attention.
A common theme was uncomfortability around people my own age. It was always easier to talk to adults because other young people made me see what I lacked, while there's a disconnection to adults where I didn't perceive them as judging or even thinking about me. At least in school, I was comparing myself to the average person, but here, in an explicitly dysfunctional group, I still felt like an incompetent reject. There was no interest in new relationships, but I felt deficient for feeling that way around the social group. My self-isolation would cause other people to treat me differently, which would compound the alienation as I felt the mood of the room shift whenever my presence was acknowledged. That's exactly why the desire was to be invisible. That's why I liked living at night. because it gave the impression of being vagrant. But the more daylight, the more people, and in turn, the more inadequacy. Eventually, I left treatment on my own accord. For a while, I felt like I hadn't been getting much out of our meetings and had been gradually reducing my days to 3 a week instead of 5. That also allowed me to spend full days at the internship I had gotten instead of showing up at 1 o'clock each day. In early February, I started working there part-time. They never knew I wasn't actively in school.
It's weird that rehab gave me the same feelings I felt in high school and at the same time repeated what I felt when I left high school. A sense of inevitable sadness, of a part of your life passing by. It made me think of the jobs I've left. The strange last day where everything is the same except you feel different. It's uncomfortable. I'm calm. Everything is over. And when I finally go through a door for the last time and begin to drive away, the growing distance becomes evident.
I floated for a long time, not making a decision to start working the steps. Not that I didn't have moments of thinking I would. There was a period of a few months trying to get a sponsor. During one speaker meeting, I was able to relate to them in terms of self-hatred and how he had put off getting a sponsor for so long. And he said he was available for sponsorship. I sat in my seat, prepared to ask him afterwards, but as the meeting wound down, the pit in my stomach grew, and my certainty flipped into avoidance. At a point, I knew I wasn't going to be able to ask. I couldn't make myself. I left the meeting immediately and went to the train platform. This wasn't the first time I had made up my mind to ask someone for sponsorship and then fell apart immediately before. I was on the verge of breaking down because I knew I was actively making the wrong decision.
I know ultimate purpose will come from service for others, but that can't be done in a vacuum. There are relationships that form, and I'm raging against the machine of interacting with strangers beyond what I'm comfortable with. I don't initiate anything. I have a group of friends I enjoy, but I never sought out those relationships. I've just been fortunate enough to have everything fall into my lap. The best comparison is a lottery winner who still winds up bankrupt.
I hated speaking during meetings. In the process of going around the table, I wouldn't be able to concentrate on anyone because I would be preoccupied with writing my script. I would fidget in my seat while my mind ran through a bolded list of points to make. Then I would realize I hadn't heard anything this person had said in the past minute of them talking, and I would attempt to focus on them. But within 10 seconds, the automatic process of rehearsing would retake control. The whole process of planning ensured that I would never execute the ideal version in practice. I would always miss something, or have no connection between statements, and then I would begin rambling about something I didn't plan. And the internal analysis afterwards would scrutinize every little detail and discourage me from speaking in the future because I was so bad at it and it was so painful to initiate. Many times I would resolve to pass on commenting before I attended a meeting so I could actually listen to other people. At one meeting I attended close to where I live, I had only been to this club once before, I felt compelled to speak once it was my turn. I hadn't planned on it earlier. It had been 6 months of attending meetings, and still I did not have a sponsor. So that's what I said. Self-hatred, purposelessness, fear of people, knowing other people have gotten results, but not thinking that could apply to me while also knowing that makes no sense. And I ended it all with, "So I'm looking for a sponsor." The chair of the meeting, Alex, offered to be my sponsor. He got a big book from the front desk and gave it to me, telling me to read to page 89 by the time we met next week. I got his number to check in if I had any thoughts of using or any questions on the reading. He was very hands-off in his approach to sponsorship, unlike many other sponsors. We didn't talk often apart from our weekly meeting. He would send passages or the thought of the day, but mostly the extent of our phone interactions was to confirm our meeting later that same day. It was incumbent on me to reach out if I needed anything, and there were few instances where I did. After delaying my reading the entire week, I crammed everything the night before we met, and even then, I only finished a portion of the reading, with one chapter remaining. This was fine, though. At the club, he said the task was mostly to see that I had some level of commitment. He chaired the Monday evening meeting, so we would meet an hour before the start time to talk. Still, like in treatment, I was unsure as to whether I wanted to get better. It was exhausting to be aware of my depravity and the need for change while seeming to lack the ability to change. The progress up to this point was simply out of having no other option available, but I didn't particularly like the recovery option presented to me. The entire time, even when things were changing, I never felt as if I was actively making a decision. Change only came when I ran out of options. The path of least resistance hadn't worked, and at this point I felt an obligation to do anything different. Otherwise, I only followed what I wanted to do in the current moment. There was no discipline or self-control. The only hope was that things could eventually change because I was still young, and the fear was the older I got without seeing any change, I would be more willing to kill myself at some point. I saw that as a more plausible outcome. The issue was, other people only interacted with the front-facing, filtered version of myself, but I spoke with the worst version of myself every day. When I would attempt to communicate what I saw as the problem, I struggled to find an answer, but I was convinced there was one. It would only come up in times of isolation. I would remember my past, the moments where all my barriers came down and I lose control and hurt.
The feeling is leave. Stay away from me. There's no hope for change or decisive action. I tear down every wall I build an hour after completion. Sick of subjecting people to my uncertainty and causing more hurt. My mind acts alone regardless of everything and everyone else. And it is like they all dodged a bullet. I didn't see in my self-destruction or making decisions for other people as noble martyrdom, but it was the least awful option given my unreliability. Feeling afterwards, I never thought I was doing a good thing. It compounded how I already felt, but the relief came from the fact that I couldn't disappoint any further.
And I could see into the future where simply talking to someone for 5 minutes or even eating something would cause me to not feel terrible. But that only frustrated me that these feelings I take as real could be easily changed by relatively insignificant events, the aftermath of which leaves me feeling and thinking the exact opposite of what I felt 5 minutes before. I lacked the ability to trust myself. Because there is no consistent self-identity, any thoughts on my self-perception or worldview or goals or wants, desires, needs are bound to fluctuate between opposites that are both true. Each step I took in any direction would be followed by a step in the other, keeping me in the same place while frantically stomping around. There was a step 0 that was required before moving forward, deciding whether I want to get better. Accepting 1 and 2 was not difficult in my mind. The difficulty was finding the desire to. Besides not deserving it, I did not want forgiveness. I did not want love. There was no wish for fellowship or a need to be seen or any sort of intimacy with God or people. Not feeling like a person caused me to not value myself as a person, seeing merely a shattered shell in human form. My desire was to be a slave, to be told what to do without having how I feel or what I think involved, because a slave is not thought about or considered beyond how they can serve you. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be around other people. I didn't want them to be around me. I wanted death. In the literal sense, I desired nothing, and I was resentful to be alive. And the thing was, there wasn't a thunderous moment of suddenly feeling different, but things did begin to change gradually. Most of the time, the routine of morning reading and prayer that Alex and the program advocated for didn't emotionally connect with me. It felt like a chore, but I did it regardless because there were times where it seemed like the big book was directly speaking to me. And even then, knowing that I felt better if I started my day this way, I never desired to. Prayer did become a larger part of my life, and I felt a more active connection to God. I would pause and pray during the day if something was upsetting me, and I would be able to give up the issue to an extent, at least to the point where I wouldn't react destructively. Many of the instinctual reactions would be paused instead of acted upon as I tried to give up my own will. As the weeks went on, there was a growing feeling of being functional, exemplified by routinely waking up to take the train to work and then going to a meeting afterwards. Summer was starting, and I was starting to feel better. I was engaging with the group more, and it became easier to as they grew more familiar. Sharing and the anticipatory dread before walking into a room lessened to where I was comfortable enough to go to a new club or new meetings, and would even raise my hand when the chair asked if anyone is at this meeting for the first time. Being in a group setting of people who were overcoming hopelessness gave me a sense of purpose. It meant something to be there and to show up for other people. Now having some time within the group, I could effectively talk to new people as someone who was relatively new. The uncertain feelings of showing up to a group for the first time or returning after a relapse were still in my memory. Involving myself with others allowed me to get out of my thought loops and focus on someone else. There were no feelings of being a burden by having heavy conversations. Talking openly about the worst things was the normal conversation, and how it wasn't superficial was exactly what I liked about it. There were times I would talk to someone at a meeting or in my personal life, and I would feel a genuine and meaningful connection. Talking to someone who was like me was something I never knew I wanted. Not having to qualify, being able to say delusional and hopeless things without fear of the other person judging or not understanding or trying to tell you that the thoughts you know are wrong are wrong. The solidarity we shared wasn't trivial. It felt profoundly meaningful. After so much time of thinking there was no solution, that everyone like me was dead, here was a group of people, while not identical, I could feel a genuine connection to. Simply being surrounded by similar people who were working to improve gave me motivation and hope to do the same. Spending so much time in rooms put a new set of priorities and expectations and thoughts into my head, because it simply displaced the time I normally would spend ruminating. Showing up would realign my thoughts to a certain way of living that otherwise would gradually fade to my dysfunctional normal in between meetings. There is a routine of spiritual fitness, gratitude, and giving up my will, and at certain points I could see how differently my internal world was now. While a lot of my mental time had been occupied by progressing in program, I would still think about her, but not to a crazy-making extent. One of the recurrent thoughts was looking ahead to steps 8 and 9, where I would have to make amends to people in my life and who would end up as a living amends. During the summer, I started on lamotrigine in addition to the bupropion. Before that, I had given SSRIs another try, and it instantly gave me similar side effects as it had years ago. Reduced pain, reduced ability to feel hot or cold, inner dialogue shut down, slight differences in sight and hearing, waking up after 6 hours of sleep feeling completely awake, short-term memory loss, anhedonia, angrier, more hopeless, lower energy, increased mood swings, and someone at a meeting commented that my pupils were extremely dilated. The lamotrigine had its own series of effects. Something about the latent dissociation I experienced was different, but I couldn't tell exactly if it was better or worse. Sometimes it reminded me of the disconnected, robotic movements of ketamine, and at other points I felt more connected to my body than normal. Eventually I came to realize it didn't lessen the dissociation, it only made me more actively aware of it. It did make me feel more like a person, but the short-term memory was worse on this compared to other medications, and a lot of thoughts were disconnected from each other. But in terms of program, things were connecting in my head in a completely new way. Instead of thinking about what to do, I was doing, and it led to results. That sense of progress is what gave me hope. And while I didn't feel great all the time, I had a stable sense of being content, and a sense of meaning, and a community I was invested in. Taking on responsibility and being around people is something I desired rather than dreaded. I started chairing my own meeting on Sunday nights. I could walk around in my daily life without getting upset that people could look at me. The gratitude I was learning about and reading in the big book started to show up in my life. The possibility of using was nearly gone as I began to conflate it with giving up. Given my past, I saw going back to drugs the same as suicide. There was one morning, after I had done my reading and began to pray, when a thought came to me. I didn't want to go back. For the first time, I felt like that was genuine. And reflecting, I couldn't remember the last time I even passively thought about killing myself. There was a message. It had been another year. I had been preparing for this, and things didn't have to be the same. We planned to meet up at a Panera near where her parents were living the following day. Almost immediately, I started telling Trevor and Alex about it. Experience had taught me keeping this to myself was a bad decision. They were both concerned. I was engaging with the primary reason that led me to using. The situation I put myself in had a history of emotional catastrophe and addictive inconsistency, but I was now committed to finding resolution with what I felt as a healthy headspace. So we started running through the outcomes. What if things don't work out, or they stay the same? Or what if things do work out? Things staying the same was out of the question for me. I was going to be as upfront as possible. But the reason they were concerned is also what concerned me, but for different reasons. The link between my reaction to her and self-destruction. It had stained all of our interactions, but that's not something I could tell her. They both wanted me to cancel, but I felt like this was needed.
Matt, I hope you haven't left yet. There's a lot going on right now, and I'm not sure I have the mental capacity to meet up with anyone right now.
This outcome had been in the back of my mind. Most of the previous day I spent thinking about how I felt 1 year ago. I thought about that feeling sitting in the parking lot. I thought about this continuing indefinitely. I refused to let it happen again.
You don't have to explain, but this whole situation in general is weird. I don't really know what's going on. I kind of just wanted to see you and catch up, but I didn't know you were living in the city. I'm sorry for reaching out. I'll be honest, it isn't possible for me to divorce what happened in high school between us and how things are now. I still have remnants of those feelings wrapped in guilt, even though I have apologized. Talking once a year after everything that I've done, my brain can't make sense of it. I don't have anything against you. I can't even think of anything you did wrong to me, but rehashing this isn't good for me. I wanted to tell you this today regardless. If you want to talk in any capacity today, I'm willing, but it's your choice. I'm sorry for sending an essay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize us talking would be painful. I'll stop reaching out. I hope you are well, Matt. All I want to know is what you're thinking. I've never had a good picture of that. Again, you don't have to explain. Otherwise, it would be better to not talk. But I myself would rather have some sort of understanding. I just thought you were one of the people that I could talk to without hiding anything, and that you fully got me. I felt comfortable around you and comfortable to share things with you, but I understand where you're coming from because it's shitty for someone to keep coming back into your life uninvited. I'm fine with talking to you. The problem is the inconsistency and me never clarifying what we are doing here. The status quo is what I can't handle. Talking once a year, anticipating when these feelings are going to drop on me again. I want to know what you want to do, regardless of what I think or feel. Where do we go from here? I'm always going to have some sort of attachment to you. I don't know why, and I don't know how to manage it since it has been a while. I don't want to keep intruding on your life if you don't want me to. I'm sorry it's inconsistent, but after seeing you last, I think I found comfort in knowing you were doing your own thing and happy. But now I'm home, and I think about you every now and then, and sometimes I just want to be in your life. I don't know if you feel the same. It's okay if you don't. I didn't think you really liked me anymore after we both left for college, too. So I don't know. It's super confusing for me, so I'm sorry. I don't know why I have an attachment to you either. It just is. I'm willing to do something if you are. I'm in a much better place in life to do so. But things have to be different. I'd like to meet up and actually talk about this. I don't know when, though. Do you want to meet at Ogilvy? Sure. Did you really like me back when we were a thing? I did like you. I also like to torpedo the good things in my life. I know you did, but would you like me again? I have no reason to doubt it. Have you been with other people? Not for about 2 years. Can I call you?
Her voice was quiet, seemingly uncertain, at least initially, but conversation picked up quickly and I became more comfortable and talkative. We spoke for about an hour. This sequence of events, where everything almost fell apart like every other time, didn't make my two counselors any happy about my choice to proceed. Trevor and Alex both stuck to the same warnings and reminded me of the past. But it didn't matter. My mind was made up. I couldn't stop smiling. I would randomly burst into laughter and start to roll around on my bed while being more than content at just staring at the ceiling. I began to take notes at work for conversational topics or questions for her I could fall back on if things got quiet. I wrote down all the things that caused me to self-destruct in the past, the pros and cons of meeting up, and the possibility for me to implode if things went wrong again.
I think my position today was canceled, so now I'm just in the city and exhausted. So what does that mean? I'm just randomly in the city now. They called me at 8 because one Wednesday a month they go on an outing, and I guess this was the Wednesday. Do you still want to do something, or do you want to set another day? I mean, yeah, I'm down to do something. I'm just kind of sitting around right now.
In emergencies or accidents, it feels like time passes slower. The threat causes your brain to instinctually speed up, allowing you to remember the sequences of events, what you were thinking, everything you said, and the imagery is vivid, being able to recall details with specificity. Whenever we talk, I'm on a collision course with Justine. I didn't have the opportunity to be nervous. Things moved so fast that by the time I got to the VA center, I was calm. It's always weird meeting up with someone after a long time. I can't really remember how they look with clarity. Still able to recognize the person, but it's not how I imagined. Our interactions were so infrequent that I couldn't form a picture of her face in my mind. Occasionally, I would pass by someone in the street who had a resemblance to her, and for a moment, I could remember what she looked like. But it was always only for a moment, gone within seconds. We hit it off immediately. It reminded me of why I liked her. High or not, it was easy to keep conversation, never having to think of what to say or what to ask or how I appeared. I didn't tolerate talking to her. I actually enjoyed it. She had already seen the worst of me and hadn't run away. Unlike the usual disgust that comes from that realization, I was comfortable. We went to Golden Apple Diner. I had been there before and I knew it would be an okay spot to go to. It didn't take long to get into the story of my downward spiral. I told her about the first overdose, the benzo bender, Pathlight, and Rosecrans. I specifically left out the second overdose, saying I didn't want to talk about it now. She said if she wasn't medicated, she would be upset at me. In fewer words, she told me she was bipolar. A lot of stories about fighting with roommates, family, her dad finding out she smokes, running away from home, making suicidal gestures, trying to jump out a window while her dad holds her back, the ringer of medication she's been through. We bonded over how awful lithium is. It wasn't all doom and gloom. A lot of time was spent on current and future life events, but the most meaningful conversations were about delusional emotions. Usually, when talking to someone with similar experiences, there comes a point where one of us can't experientially understand the other because our thought processes are fundamentally different. But that never happened with her. It was strange how similar some of our experiences were, and some thoughts of hers were word for word what I had written down years ago. It had an intensity I had only found with one other person I met in group. She told me how in Urbana she was working at a nursing home, explaining things like the people she met there and how she couldn't have much of a social life because she worked late and would have to show up to places in scrubs if she actually wanted to spend a meaningful amount of time with people. Most of the time she was doing the grunt work associated with a nursing home, but she started caring for one specific woman more often. They became friends, but her condition worsened. When she reached out to her son that the woman wouldn't be around for much longer, he didn't want to visit. The woman died during her shift. They were alone in her room, and Justine was holding her hand at her bedside, and at some point she stopped breathing. She didn't know. She thought, but she wasn't sure. So she remained holding her hand and staring at her until it couldn't be denied or explained another way. She stopped working there after the semester was over. We finished eating, and the question was, what now? Not the what now question that I wanted yet, but what were we doing next? 31st Street Beach had been very busy lately. I had been trying to visit it within the past week so I could think, but between it being summer, and people do go outside in the summer, and the 4th of July being recent, it was packed. We made our way to the outcrop. There is a small park there with large concrete steps to sit on where we sat and got a view of the skyline. The whole reason why I return here. I asked if she was aware when she was getting her mood swings. She had explained earlier the story of her leaving her house and sleeping in the back of her car just to get away. The entire time she wasn't thinking about what she was doing, but when she woke up, the thought of, "What am I doing?" crossed her mind. We shared a lot of the same experiences and ways of thinking. Many times when she was explaining something, I would laugh in agreement because I knew exactly. Sometimes I would be able to finish her sentences in my head before she got to the end of them. She wasn't honest with her therapist. She was a people pleaser. She was afraid of her mother. She was afraid of disappointing people. She stays alive out of fear of hell. She doesn't feel like a person. She thinks it would be funny if she was still alive in 5 years. Feeling lost, not having a strong sense of self-identity, or likes or goals. Mostly drifting through life on the default path of school and starting a family without knowing if that's really what you want. But you go with it because that's the expectation, and they seem to have the book that allows them to figure out life, and you would never want to disappoint them. I asked if she knew the Serenity Prayer, to which she needed me to start it.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Never once did I feel like she was lying. It seemed like complete honesty. Saying things she didn't want to share with other people because she felt like a hopeless freak. What made the difference is that she said she felt like I would never hate her for those things. The only person I ever hated was myself. She tried to get me to change that to judge, but I said the original was better fitting.
Does thinking about me bring back bad memories?
I paused, long enough to where the answer was clear before I spoke a word.
Yes and no.
In the past few weeks, those memories had not been bothering me to the degree they once did. It was a me problem, especially since I had already apologized and she had moved on. She asked for the time, and I asked if she wanted to go to the station.
I can't make you do anything. And I don't want to make you do anything. This choice is yours, and I mean that in more ways than one. I don't know.
We made our way back to the car. The few attempts she made at conversation, I didn't reciprocate to any respondable degree. The tape was beginning to play forward in my head, and I knew I needed an answer, a clarified answer, an explanation to I don't know. It was that question. There was frustration in both our voices. She was surprised by my answer, even though she already knew what it was. What are you supposed to do with something like that? I had been wondering it myself. I hadn't spoken about her role in my addiction, and I didn't know if I ever could. How would I be able to put that on someone? Even though it wasn't her fault, what could you do with knowing your interactions with someone led them to nearly killing themselves? How is that something you could move past and now have a functional relationship? Me answering that question was a small portion of the larger truth I withheld. I wanted her to say what she felt, what she wanted to do, regardless of how I feel. She never made the choice. Afterwards, the entire car ride back home, my mind was blank. I had no immediate feeling. Maybe I had already gotten it out in the days preceding. I had been thinking of what to say in this potential outcome for the past few days. I was in denial about its certainty, but here it was whether I wanted it to be true or not. I sent this when I got home. I've said about all I can say. I still wish things could have worked out differently. I need you to try to not contact me. I genuinely wish you the best, Justine. I blocked all contact. I finally did what Trevor and Alex said I should have done a long time ago. It's impossible for me to know what she was really thinking, to know if she was being honest, to know if she felt guilty, to know if some part of her wanted to try. But after I had messaged my sponsor, it is done, and I read his response, I broke down. Just remember, we don't control anything. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. I had been thinking about this for a while. The reason for my addiction, the reason for my sobriety, all started by not waking up on time for graduation practice. God had been working these past 3 years through this situation to bring me back to personhood. I sat on my bed thinking, my God, my God, oh my God. My past interactions with Justine broke me down to the point where I knew I couldn't continue on as I had in the past. The tears were cathartic. I'm not resentful, and I don't hate her. She helped me realize that I didn't want to die. I wanted a reason to live. My mind was quiet. The next day I woke up feeling off. I was obviously thinking about yesterday, but I also knew the sadness I felt wasn't completely from the thought of never talking to her again. When I got to work, I spent the first few hours staring into my monitor until the reason why came to me. Tears began forming. I got up from my desk and went into the fire escape.
I can't help her. I can't do anything.
I had never cried for someone else. I knew the same agony and uncertainty. A lack of self, fear of rejection, self-loathing. I knew that hopelessness and uncontrollability, feeling alone and terminally broken. And I knew that no one could have told me anything or done anything to bring me out of that. The worst thing was realizing this was happening every day, and it wasn't going to suddenly go away for her. It only worsens as you feel more isolated. When I woke up, I was feeling bad before I even knew what I was feeling bad for. I mean, I was thinking about her, obviously, but it took a while until I realized how much of myself I saw in her. I'd seen it while we were talking, but I guess I didn't think of it as to how I was. When I was talking to her in the moment, I was relating to her how I am now. And then the day after, I was relating to how I was. And the person that I was has a lot more in common with who she is now. I mean, there are a lot of things that were eerily similar, word for word, basically. The being afraid, only living because you're afraid of going to hell, not particularly because you want to live, not really feeling like a person,
not really having any goals or aspirations, just going off of what other people expect or just what most people expect out of life in general give well without being able to give it thought yourself, just because you don't even know what you want. And thinking that it would be funny if you were still alive in 5 years, not really caring about whether you were alive or not. And to some extent, that's a hopelessness that I haven't had to deal with for a little while. Something that I even forgot about.
It felt like a void was collapsing near my heart. Crying seemed like the only appropriate release, but soon I couldn't anymore, and that left only frustration. Not angry, but a sorrowful and desperate frustration at the recognition nothing could be done. But all I could think was, what could I do to help, to fix, to simply be there and be available to her? I felt as if I was in a position to, that while I knew I couldn't help in any real sense, I could offer shared experience, and if I had to, I would have crawled across the state just to do that. I would have sat with her indefinitely, because when I was in that space, I desperately wanted to find someone who knew, who really knew the pain, the hopelessness, and the crushing weight of emptiness. Anyone who had an answer, something that worked for them, who could listen and accept the things I hated about myself that I could never admit to another person. There's all this affection that could go nowhere. It meant nothing, and it was likely to push her further away. There was no good answer. There was no right answer, and I knew because there wasn't one for me. I was left soul sick to watch someone I care about not care about themselves. This wasn't going to leave my mind anytime soon. From past experiences, I knew the precarious situation I was in emotionally. I didn't have a desire to use right now, but that wasn't a permanent guarantee. It would be good to stay occupied, talk about it, and go to meetings. Later that night, I joined the voice call and asked if anyone was doing anything this weekend. Logan's girlfriend Julie was moving, and he jokingly said I could help the move. That was perfect in my mind. I spent most of my Saturday with them. There wasn't too much to move. We were able to get the majority included on one trip, and after we had gotten everything into the apartment, I set up some of the living room furniture with Logan. As it got later into the evening, we all sat on the floor in Julie's new room.
I said I needed something to do this weekend, and while I was more than glad to help move, it's not the reason why I'm here.
On the ride over, I'd planned how I should go about explaining this. Trevor was the only one outside of my family who knew I was in recovery. My hospital visit was the limit of what the rest of my friends knew. There was a lot to cover, but I could start there. Explain the indifference, the benzo bender, Trevor and my family finding out, the mental health facility, the second overdose, rehab, going to meetings, getting on medication, and discovering the smallest sense of hope to sustain me through the process of recovery up to the current day. I spent a good amount of time talking about my experiences in group, how 12-step works, and the spiritual aspect of program.
So, why am I telling you this? Do you remember when I told you about my Montana trip? I mentioned a part 2 that I'd talk about another time. There's a reason why I did everything.
And now here came the part I was most afraid to talk about. I had no hang-ups about discussing my drug addiction, but the contributing reasons were the core of shame that fueled everything after. The tapes roll back 3 years to senior year of high school, and I start from the beginning again. Being a part of some of these events, Logan had some pre-existing knowledge of my interactions with Justine, but I'd hidden nearly everything else. The phone call first semester, the apology, using the Texas trip as a means of getting her attention, the following meeting, the voice recording rants, and the end of the Montana story I had previously promised. The downward spiral that followed, and now the events of the past few days. I was desperately searching for someone to tell me what I knew no one would, knowing all this information, that I shouldn't have blocked her. I should reach out and try to help.
I was out yesterday trying to go to a meeting, but when I got there, the door was locked, so I assumed it wasn't active anymore. I ended up just going home, but on that ride home, a thought came to me. If I could, I would trade places with her. I would go through everything again if I knew she would be fine. I think I love her as a person. I don't know if I'm coping and I still like her romantically or where these feelings come from. Do you really think you could have an emotionally intimate relationship and it not lead to something else? I have a reflexive dread before I look at my phone. I still check looking for something that will never come. I learned it expecting each time that there is a chance the axe could fall today, knowing that at some point she will come back. It's strange to have the assuredness that it isn't true anymore. The instinct is still there, but I know it will eventually go away. Part of me wants to continue it. I see someone as helpless and confused as me. I wish I could be there for her. I care about her a lot. I care about her too much. Even though I see everything in her also in me, I don't afford myself that same care. I want to listen and help out to the best of my ability, but I know I can't. Even strictly as a friend, I doubt it would work. Unfortunately, I can't let go of our past. It makes me feel selfish in a way, to let this go when it seems like I might have been the only person she was honest about her feelings and failures with. Many of those addictive tendencies rule my life. I still forget when I'm supposed to be changing. I forget and give in to rotting away a whole day on YouTube or playing a game, not wanting to get up to eat, drink, or go to the bathroom until I'm so starved, thirsty, and uncomfortable that I physically can't give myself another 5 minutes. And I immediately go back because I'm annoyed that I even have to get up. I still go into doom mode. Recently, I stayed up a whole day with 3 hours of sleep and then sat in a cold shower thinking that every bit of progress is fake. It was like the old circuits were flipped on again. I'm not a real person. I go back to the same things I always do. I have nothing to live for. I want the cheap escapism of drugs. I am hopeless, broken, and defective. There is a hole in my head that nothing can fill. No music, movie, game, book, activity, person, labor, or hobby. I sit in agony and self-destruction. The last thing I want is to see people. I love to live at night in my own world, and with enough time, my social ability will atrophy to the point where I feel like there's no other option than to live in the dark, in the prison of uniqueness. In those moments, sobriety is from fear, not desire. My default is to run to the mud after being cleaned, and I want to. But I also know that returning to using is equivalent to killing myself. They are equal in my mind. I was always too scared to kill myself because I know who's waiting for me, and the same is true for using. The knowledge gained from recovery has ruined the ignorance I had in drug use. I know exactly what I'm doing and for what reasons. It's the same shame that kept me from calling the ambulance again when I was overdosing the second time. What matters is that I'm on the path. There is no perfect adherence, but in times of sanity, I return to things that are good. Every one of my thoughts led me to destruction, so self-will hasn't worked. Denying what I want has produced better outcomes for everyone. It's easy to say when there are no waves. Each time I'm back on the emotional roller coaster, it's as if it's both happening for the first time and it has always been this way. Everything is hopeless, and I get the gift of suffering through life until I can finally die by some means not of my own hand. And still no advice that I have heard will stick in those moments. I'm completely unreasonable. Even when someone tells me the reality of the situation, even when I think of something that would ground me, it seems unbearable. I go back to thinking, I'm not meant for this. I can't handle the basics that other people can. Life isn't for me. It is such an obsession that I'm scared of losing it. If I'm not thinking about her every day, then what do I do with that empty space? It's been so long that I don't remember anything else. Jumping from ruminating on one event to the next for 8 years. There hasn't been a moment in my adolescence where I have not been obsessing. I don't know anything else. Entertaining the idea of moving on gives me the same nauseous dread as when I talk to her.
A week after we met, I sent her a message. I guess there is more to say. I didn't have the words to say it, but when I said yes and no to does thinking about you bring back bad memories, it's because I care a lot. I had to get up from my desk at work last week to cry in the fire stairwell because I see a similar sense of hopelessness in you that I've only slightly begun to pass. A year ago, I was under the impression that anyone like me was dead, and soon too would I be, but I have seen that it isn't true. I don't know if you feel that way, but regardless, I don't want you to. Me feeling bad, sad, or even disappointed is not itself bad if for the right reasons. It doesn't have to be me, but if you want to talk to someone about these issues or things in general, as an understanding friend, my door is and will remain open. Thank you, Matt, but I'm not going to reach out to you anymore. I care about you enough to know that this is what you feel is best for you, so I'm going to respect it. I hope everything works out in the end for you. You aren't a burden to bear, and I wouldn't be making a sacrifice. It helps me when I share my experiences and what has worked for me. Talking with people, especially about myself and my problems, was the last thing I wanted. I tried everything else, but that was the only thing that made things better. If not me, I only hope you find people you can talk honestly with. And that was it. A shift happened when I attended meetings now. Before, when I heard others speak, I was relating their experiences to my own, but now I was associating their words to how I could try to help her. Anytime I heard something that had worked for me, I would think, if only she could hear this. If only I had told her that then. I could not focus, and I could not stop. Much of the time I would have a thought and direct it at her. A one-way conversation, where I would begin to explain something, but there was never a response. The other side never popped in my head. My program became based on her. I looked forward to step 9 so I would have an external excuse of apology to justify talking to her. Even outside of meetings, each moment of silence would revolve around her. She became what my brain defaulted to in a completely new way with unmatched intensity to my previous obsession. I would run through conversations in my head. I would play out potential future situations, and I rehearsed my recovery story trying to think of what could have helped me when I was in a similar place, so that next time I won't mess up. If I wasn't interested in something, my mind would turn to her. At times, when people tried to talk to me, I would start daydreaming before they'd gotten halfway through what they wanted to say. I would go back and listen to old voice recordings to remember how and why I felt certain things to try and understand where she was at. And the times where I read past journal entries or listened to recordings about her, I would go into non-stop obsessive thinking, only relieved when I fell asleep at the end of the day. With this, I never had to think about anything else. No future, no hopes, no plans, except for this. At the time, I was well aware of the purpose this daydreaming served, but I had no desire to stop. What lied underneath was hopelessness and no real desire to live. The thought of this not working out filled me with the same sense of doom I felt as when I thought about her. It was a confusing process where my assessment of the situation would change multiple times a day, so I defaulted to making lists. Is it even possible for me to help, and is that even the best outcome for her? What is the best outcome for her? If I talked to her again, I would have to deal with disappointment. I couldn't expect anything, and I'd have to be on demand if that's the commitment I make to her. This wouldn't be something I could take back. I would be gambling with us both, but I knew when I was in that place I would have wanted an example of someone who has some semblance of improvement because I thought they didn't exist. It would be a return to the status quo, getting back on the emotional roller coaster where my emotional state is derived from her. Regardless of if I did it or not, I would worry, but the responsibility would be so much greater in active contact. And then I had to contend with my own motivations. Would it be right to present myself in a friendly, supportive way if there was still romantic interest? I desperately wanted to do the right thing in terms of her, but it wasn't possible for me to discern because I'm not her. I had to factor in my history with her, my propensity to shut down my good feelings. Everything was wrapped up in self-hatred. It wasn't difficult for me to see the extent of my obsession and how it would look to any outside observer the fact that I spent most of my days thinking about one person I see on a yearly basis. I didn't want anyone to see me that way. I didn't want anyone checking in to ask if I'd been thinking about her lately, because it would never be a matter of if. It would be a matter of how much. Logan was the last person I talked to about Justine, and no one knew I messaged her again. That wasn't sustainable. Eventually, I would have to be honest when I read my fourth step.
I can't offer my will or life to God without reservation because I think I'm inadequate and I'm confused about my role. Can I and should I ask for something I both do and don't want? How do I bring this change, or do I need to do anything at all? I'm exhausted with myself for repeating the same mistakes and being so slow to learn. The answers, the problems can all be known, and something in me prevents the change. I'm a slave to my emotions. Everything goes through the filter of, how does it relate to me? I rarely think about the good of other people, how I can be of service. I don't protect the weak or comfort the weary. I make promises, delusional resolutions I never follow through because of my concerns, my fears, my failures and inadequacies that prevent any usefulness. I knowingly, unknowingly break those promises. I emotionally revert, think about it for a while, know what I have to do, know that I will immediately forget and begin to make exceptions for why this time I can leave it for another time. But I only and always leave it for another time. I don't do anything. I don't do anything for anyone. I take the path of least resistance so I can be comfortable and unchallenged in my self-perception. But I'm aware of what I'm doing, and I can't stop.
I looked for answers in other programs like Narcotics Anonymous and Codependence Anonymous, but NA was similar to AA except they hugged, and I didn't want anyone touching me. And CODA seemed more like group therapy with less emphasis on working steps and the spiritual aspect of program. With desperation to find any answer, I wandered into an Emotions Anonymous meeting on Christmas Eve. In total, there were 4 people in attendance. The chair introduced himself. His name was also Matthew, and he self-identified as a recovering batterer. The structure of the meeting was more similar to CODA, where multiple smaller passages from a variety of sources are read and then commented on. But there are also sections dedicated to sharing on the anger and sadness you had felt in the past week. One of the rules was to not talk about specific problems, only your emotional response to them. I had been observing the others' responses while not offering my own, but the chair specifically called on me near the end of the meeting if I wanted to share, and everything started coming out.
I'm stuck in obsession over past events and past mistakes, and I'm consumed in self-hatred, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I've been going to meetings for about a year and finding myself in a similar place to where I started, unable to move on. I know that this is preventing any sort of meaningful recovery and completely stopping my life because everyone I talk to says the same thing. But it doesn't matter because I hold on and ruminate. I plot and wonder what could have been different about this situation with a girl, and I don't know where to go for help. I know I need it, but I've been looking in different places and I haven't found anything. And I'm getting exhausted with myself because all my relationships are dysfunctional. I don't know where people have found answers.
The chair spoke to me. He said in his first marriage he was a serial wife-beater, and the results of his actions were divorce and self-isolation for 12 years out of guilt. He hated himself and how defective he was, and how he was a cancer on the people around him. After those 12 years, he eventually did enter into another relationship, but he was too scared to be around her for extensive periods of time. Even after they'd been dating for years, he refused to live together because of his history, and it inhibited their ability to have an intimate connection. The self-hatred did nothing for him except to further hurt other people. He was the only one continuing to hold this over himself. He had made amends with his wife, but he couldn't accept it. The only thing that diminished his self-hatred was accepting his actions in the past as they occurred, and not how he would have wanted them to. Battery was a reflection of his character, but it didn't have to be now. He directed me to look towards something like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous to find people with similar problems. These are situations in which the other person is speaking as someone who experientially understands. There was something in him I admired, a model for what could be. Chairing a meeting on Christmas Eve at noon to only 3 other people seemed so inconsequential and thankless, and yet it mattered. It meant something for him to be there. His ability to be honest resulted in something real and helped me to continue searching.